Look, I had been studying primitive species for 300 cycles, and I thought I had seen everything. Turns out, I had seen absolutely nothing. My name is Krivash, senior xenobiologist for the Galactic Consortium, and let me tell you something about humans. They are completely, utterly, magnificently insane. The assignment seemed simple enough. A newly contacted species on a backwater planet called Earth. Technology level, laughable. Barely figured out faster than light travel. Still fighting wars over imaginary lines on their planet's surface. The briefing document said they called themselves humans, and that we needed cultural analysis before formal integration. Standard procedure. Go down, observe, file reports, collect a paycheck, avoid getting space rabies. Easy. I volunteered because the alternative was analyzing fungal reproduction on Thexer 9, and I would rather drink recycled ship coolant than spend another cycle watching mushrooms propagate. They assigned me a human liaison. Her name was Dr. Mira Holcomb, and the first time I met her, she walked into my observation chamber eating something called a breakfast burrito. Just walked right in, mid-bite, like we were old friends. Not even a formal greeting. No ceremonial exchange of atmospheric samples. Nothing. So you are the alien studying us, she said, mouth still half full. That is pretty ironic, do you not think? I blinked all three of my eyes independently, a sign of confusion in my species. I failed to comprehend the irony. I am the xenobiologist. You are the subject species. She swallowed, grinned, and said, yeah, but from my perspective, you are the alien. So who is really studying who here? This was going to be a long assignment. The consortium wanted detailed reports on human social structures, conflict resolution, resource management, and decision-making processes. Boring stuff. The kind of data you could gather from orbit with a decent scanning array and a good AI. But no, they wanted boots-on-the-ground observation. Or, in my case, tentacles-on-the-ground observation. Mira took me to what she called a coffee shop. Apparently, humans regularly gather in designated locations to consume a mildly toxic stimulant beverage while complaining about their lives. The logic escaped me, but I was there to observe, not judge. That would come later, in the reports. So, Krivash, Mira said, butchering the pronunciation of my name in that special way only humans could. What do you want to know about us? Everything, I said, activating my recording implant. Start with your governmental structure. How do humans organize large-scale populations? What hierarchies exist? Who holds power and why? She laughed. Actually laughed. Like I had told a joke. Oh boy, she said, sipping her toxic beverage. You are going to hate this. Okay, so we have these things called democracies, where everyone votes. Then we have monarchies, where one family is in charge because their great-great-great-grandfather killed the right people centuries ago. Then we have republics, which are like democracies but with extra steps. We have theocracies, where imaginary sky beings apparently run things. We have dictatorships, where one person has all the power and everyone just kind of deals with it. And then we have whatever you want to call the current state of global politics, which is basically organized chaos held together by economic dependency and mutually assured destruction. I stopped recording. That cannot be accurate. You are describing at least 7 contradictory systems. Welcome to Earth, she said brightly. We contain multitudes. Mostly of contradictions. Over the next several days, Mira showed me around her city. It was called New Seattle, which I learned was not actually that new. Humans have a strange relationship with naming conventions. The original Seattle still existed. They just built another one nearby and added the word new to the front. When I asked why they did not simply create a unique name, Mira said, tradition, I guess. Plus, it confuses tourists, which is hilarious. The more time I spent with humans, the more I realized the consortium had made a severe miscalculation. These were not a primitive species waiting to be guided into galactic civilization. These were survivors. Improvised weapon manufacturers. Persistence predators who had clawed their way up from the bottom of their food chain through sheer spite and stubborn refusal to die. Mira took me to something called a gym. I thought it was a medical facility at first, because everyone inside was clearly in pain. They were lifting heavy objects repeatedly. Running on machines that went nowhere. Climbing walls that led to nothing. All voluntarily. What illness are they treating? I asked. Mira laughed again. She laughed at approximately 60% of everything I said. No illness. They are exercising. Building muscle. Staying healthy. But you have medical technology. Why would you need to maintain physical strength? She looked at me like I had just asked why water was wet. Because it feels good. Because we like being strong. Because our ancestors had to be tough to survive, and some part of us still wants that. Your species voluntarily inflicts pain on itself for aesthetic and psychological reasons. Well, when you say it like that, it sounds weird. It was weird. It was all weird. That evening, Mira invited me to her home for dinner. I accepted, hoping to observe natural human behavior in a domestic environment. What I got instead was a front row seat to controlled chaos. Her dwelling was small by consortium standards, but she had decorated it with objects from all over her planet. Textiles from one continent. Pottery from another. Art from a third. When I asked if she had traveled extensively, she said, "Not really. I just like stuff from different places." You collect artifacts from cultures you have not directly experienced. Sure. It is called appreciation. We like learning about each other. Well, most of us do. Some of us are jerks about it. But that is true of every species, right? I was not entirely sure how to respond to that. The consortium had 16 member species, and yes, every single one had individuals who were, as Mira put it, jerks about things. But we did not usually acknowledge it so casually. Dinner was an experience. Mira had prepared something called stir-fry, which apparently involved throwing multiple ingredients into a heated container and stirring them aggressively until they submitted. The result smelled appealing, looked chaotic, and tasted like my taste buds were having an argument with my digestive system. A good argument, mind you. The kind where everyone leaves slightly changed but better for it. So, Mira said between bites, "What do you think of us so far? We meeting consortium standards? Are we worthy of joining the big leagues?" I paused, considering my words carefully. Your species is unusual. You display remarkable adaptability, but also startling inefficiency. You have eliminated most survival pressures, yet actively seek out danger for entertainment. You possess weapons capable of destroying your own planet, yet have somehow not done so. You are simultaneously brilliant and reckless, compassionate and violent, organized and anarchic. I do not understand you. Mira grinned. Good. If you understood us completely after a few days, we would be pretty boring. Want to know a secret? If it pertains to my research, yes. We do not understand us either. We are still figuring it out. Every generation thinks they have it worked out, and then the next generation shows up and changes everything. That is kind of our thing. Constant change. Permanent revolution. We cannot help ourselves. The following day, Mira took me to observe something called a town hall meeting. Local citizens gathered to discuss community issues. I expected organized debate, clear hierarchies, efficient decision-making. What I witnessed instead was passionate argument, frequent interruptions, emotional appeals, logical fallacies, personal anecdotes, and after 2 hours of increasingly heated discussion, a compromise that nobody was entirely happy with but everyone could live with. That was the most inefficient decision-making process I have ever observed, I told Mira afterward. Yeah, but everyone got to speak their mind. That counts for something. Does it? You could have reached the same conclusion in a fraction of the time with a simple algorithmic analysis. Sure, but then people would feel like they were not heard. We do not just want solutions, Krivash. We want to feel like we matter in the process. That is extremely inefficient. Probably. But it is ours. Over the next several weeks, I observed humans in countless contexts. I watched them compete in sporting events, where they pushed their bodies to physical limits for no practical reason other than tribal pride and personal satisfaction. I observed their educational systems, where they taught their young not just facts but how to think critically and question authority. I studied their art, their music, their literature, all of it obsessed with the same themes. Love. Loss. Triumph. Failure. The endless human struggle against limitations, both external and internal. And slowly, very slowly, I began to understand something the consortium had missed in their preliminary assessment. Humans were not primitives waiting to be civilized. They were something else entirely. They were survivors who had refused to accept limitations. They were innovators who saw problems as invitations. They were warriors who fought not just external enemies but their own worst instincts. They were dreamers who looked at the impossible and said, "Give me a few years." My reports to the consortium became longer, more detailed, and increasingly concerned. I tried to explain what I was observing, but the data did not translate well. How do you quantify spite? How do you measure stubborn determination? How do you calculate the exact amount of reckless courage it takes to strap yourself to a chemical explosive and point it at the stars? Then came the incident that changed everything. A consortium survey vessel encountered a debris field in a neighboring system. Standard protocol. Map it, analyze it, move on. Except the debris included a human ship. A small research vessel that had been exploring the outer reaches of their solar system when something went catastrophically wrong. Life support was failing. The crew was dying. And they were well outside the range of any human rescue capability. The survey vessel reported the situation. Consortium protocol was clear. Document. Do not interfere with developing species. Let nature take its course. File the appropriate paperwork. Move on. I was monitoring communications when Mira found out. She stormed into my observation chamber, face red, hands shaking. Not with fear. With rage. Your people are just going to let them die, she said. They are right there. Your ship could save them in minutes. Consortium protocol forbids interference. We are observers, not participants. Protocol. Protocol. There are 3 people dying out there, and you are talking about protocol? The rules exist for good reasons. We cannot simply intervene every time a developing species encounters danger. You must learn to solve your own problems. Mira stared at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was disappointment mixed with determination. A dangerous combination. Then we will save them ourselves, she said. You cannot. Your fastest ships cannot reach them in time. The mathematics are absolute. She smiled. Not a friendly smile. A predatory smile. The smile of a species that had spent millennia refusing to accept the word impossible. Watch us. What happened next would be analyzed by consortium strategists for generations. Mira made a single call to Earth's Unified Space Command. Explained the situation. Within 30 minutes, they had assembled a plan that violated at least 15 laws of physics, several safety regulations, and all common sense. They were going to attempt a rescue that was absolutely, mathematically, impossibly dangerous. And I had a front row seat to humanity's first real introduction to the galaxy. The plan was insane. Let me be very clear about that. What the humans proposed was so monumentally stupid that 3 separate consortium analysts physically recoiled when I forwarded them the details. One of them actually filed a formal complaint about being exposed to such dangerously irrational thinking. Here is what they wanted to do. Take their newest experimental ship, the one they had affectionately named Defiant because humans cannot resist being dramatic, and push it past every safety threshold. Overload the engines. Bypass the coolant systems. Redirect life support power to the thrusters. Turn a research vessel into a barely controlled missile and aim it at their dying crew members. The survival probability for everyone involved, according to my calculations, was approximately 4%. And that was being generous. Captain Denise Okafor volunteered to pilot the Defiant. She was 53 years old, had 2 grown children, 4 grandchildren, and absolutely no reason to throw her life away on a rescue mission with single-digit success odds. When I asked her why she was doing this, she looked at me like I had asked why she breathed oxygen. Because they are our people, she said simply. We do not leave our people behind. Even if attempting rescue means everyone dies instead of just 3 people. Especially then. If we do not try, we are already dead. Just in a different way. I did not understand. But I was beginning to suspect that not understanding humans might be the most important thing I had learned so far. The launch was scheduled for 18 minutes after Mira had stormed out of my chamber. 18 minutes. The consortium needed 18 months just to approve modification requests for standard equipment. Humans apparently operated on pure adrenaline and collective spite. I watched from the observation deck as the Defiant prepared for launch. Mira stood beside me, hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She had not said a word since arriving. Just stared at the viewport, jaw clenched, willing the universe to cooperate through sheer force of determination. Captain Okafor's voice came through the communication system. Defiant to ground control. All systems are extremely not okay, but we are going anyway. If this works, I want a parade. If it does not work, name a ship after me. A cool ship. Not a garbage scow. Ground control responded. Understood, Defiant. Good luck. Bring them home. That is the plan. Okafor out. The engines ignited. Not the smooth, controlled ignition of proper consortium vessels. This was raw power barely contained by human engineering. The Defiant shook, rattled, and screamed its way out of the atmosphere like a wild animal clawing for freedom. Every sensor on my observation equipment lit up with warnings. Structural integrity compromised. Engine temperature critical. Navigation systems overwhelmed. Life support marginal. And Captain Okafor just kept going. She is going to kill herself, I said quietly. Maybe, Mira replied. But she is going to try first. That is what we do. The Defiant accelerated beyond any reasonable speed. My instruments could barely track it. The vessel was moving so fast that space itself seemed to protest. I pulled up the trajectory calculations. If Captain Okafor maintained this velocity, she would reach the stranded crew in 47 minutes. She would also arrive as a cloud of superheated particles because the ship would have disintegrated approximately 23 minutes into the flight. I showed Mira the numbers. She glanced at them, then looked back at the viewport. Your math is probably right, she said. But humans have a long history of doing things that should be impossible. We are really good at it. It is kind of our specialty. The next 40 minutes were the longest of my life. Every consortium vessel in the sector was watching. Word had spread through official channels. A developing species was attempting an impossible rescue. Some observers were fascinated. Others were appalled. Most were simply waiting for the inevitable tragedy so they could file it under cautionary tales and move on. But the Defiant kept flying. Captain Okafor kept making adjustments, rerouting power, coaxing every last bit of performance from a ship that should have been a debris field 15 different times. Her crew consisted of 2 engineers who spent the entire flight essentially holding the vessel together through willpower and improvised repairs. I listened to their communication channel. It was not the calm, professional dialogue of trained consortium personnel. It was chaos. Swearing. Jokes. Panic. Laughter. Someone was singing an old Earth song about staying alive. Another was providing running commentary about which systems were currently on fire. Not metaphorically on fire. Actually on fire. Hull temperature is now officially classified as not great, one engineer reported. Define not great, Captain Okafor replied. We are approximately 30 seconds from becoming a shooting star. A really impressive shooting star that people will write songs about, but still dead. Then I guess we better get there in 29 seconds. Reroute everything from the galley. Captain, we already rerouted the galley. Reroute it again. Mira was crying. Not sad crying. Proud crying. The kind of tears that happen when you watch your species do something magnificently stupid and somehow pull it off anyway. I found myself hoping, genuinely hoping, that these impossible humans would succeed. Not for my research. Not for the consortium. Just because somewhere along the way, I had started to care. The Defiant reached the stranded research vessel with 16 seconds to spare before catastrophic structural failure. Captain Okafor did not slow down, did not hesitate, just brought her barely functioning ship alongside the disabled vessel and began emergency transfer procedures. The stranded crew consisted of Dr. James Reeves, Specialist Yuki Tanaka, and Engineer Marcus Wright. They had been adrift for 6 hours, watching their oxygen levels drop, accepting their deaths with whatever grace they could manage. Then a ship that should not exist appeared, moving at speeds that should not be possible, piloted by a captain who should not have survived the journey. This is Defiant, Captain Okafor announced. We are here to give you a ride home. Please move quickly because we are currently on fire and I would like to stop being on fire. The rescue took 4 minutes. 4 minutes of frantic activity, emergency airlocks, and people moving with the kind of desperate speed that comes from knowing death is breathing down your neck. Then they were aboard. All 3 of them. Safe. Captain Okafor did not celebrate. She just started the return journey, somehow convincing the Defiant to hold together for one more impossible flight. The ship limped back to Earth, shedding parts, trailing coolant, engines stuttering, but moving. Always moving. Because stopping meant dying, and humans apparently had a cultural opposition to dying when other options existed. They made it back. Barely. The Defiant landed more like a controlled crash than an actual landing. Emergency crews surrounded it immediately. Captain Okafor emerged, covered in soot, grinning like she had just won a pleasant game instead of cheating death 17 different ways. The rescued crew stumbled out behind her. Dr. Reeves was crying. Specialist Tanaka was laughing. Engineer Wright just kept saying thank you over and over like a broken recording. And the entire human population, it seemed, was watching. The rescue had been broadcast globally. I watched the reactions pour in. Joy. Pride. Relief. Celebration. Not just for the rescued crew, but for what the rescue represented. Proof that humans would go to impossible lengths for each other. Evidence that they valued individual lives over cold calculation. Demonstration that their stubbornness was not just recklessness, but a fundamental rejection of giving up. Mira turned to me, tears still on her face, and said, "So? What do you think of us now?" I took a long moment before responding. Choosing my words carefully. Knowing that what I said next would shape my final report to the consortium. Knowing that my report would influence how the galaxy viewed humanity for generations to come. I think, I said slowly, that the consortium has no idea what it is dealing with. You are not primitives. You are not developing. You are something we have never encountered before. You are a species that looks at impossible odds and treats them as personal challenges. You value individuals over efficiency. You choose courage over calculation. You are reckless and brilliant and completely, utterly insane. And I suspect that once you fully enter the galactic stage, nothing will ever be the same. Mira smiled. Is that going in your report? Every word. Though I expect the consortium will think I have been compromised by prolonged exposure to human irrationality. Have you been? I considered the question. Thought about the past weeks. The coffee shops and town halls. The gyms and dinner parties. The impossible rescue I had just witnessed. The humans who refused to accept limitations even when limitations were clearly, mathematically absolute. Yes, I admitted. Completely compromised. I have been infected with hope, which I am told is a human condition. There is no cure. Welcome to the club, Mira said. The consortium received my report 3 days later. The response was immediate and predictable. Disbelief. Concern. Demands for verification. Suggestions that I take an extended medical leave to recover from obvious psychological damage. Accusations that I had been manipulated by clever primitives. But they could not deny the data. The rescue had happened. The impossible had become real. And humans had done it with technology the consortium considered barely functional and determination we had no metric for measuring. Within a month, the consortium convened an emergency session to discuss the human question. Should they be granted membership? Should they be quarantined? Should they be studied more carefully? Should they be feared? I was called to testify. Stood before the Council of 12 and told them everything I had learned. Not just the facts and figures, but the truth underneath. That humans were not another species to be catalogued and managed. They were a force of nature. They were change incarnate. They were the answer to a question the galaxy had not known it was asking. What happens when a species refuses to accept the word impossible? The council deliberated for 6 hours. Then they voted. Humanity would be granted provisional membership in the Galactic Consortium. Not because they had met all the technical requirements. Not because they were safe or predictable or easy to understand. But because the galaxy needed what humans had. That spark of defiant hope. That stubborn refusal to give up. That magnificent insanity that turned impossible into inevitable. I returned to Earth to deliver the news personally. Found Mira at the same coffee shop where we had first talked, drinking the same toxic stimulant beverage, grinning at me like she had known all along how this would end. So, she said. We are in. You are in. Provisionally. With approximately 47 pages of warnings, restrictions, and strongly worded suggestions that you try not to terrify the other member species too badly. We will do our best. No promises though. I sat down across from her, accepted the beverage she offered, and took a sip of the bitter liquid that humans apparently needed to function. It was awful. I requested another. What happens now? Mira asked. Now. Now the real work begins. Humanity joins the galactic community. You learn from us. We learn from you. And everyone tries very hard not to panic about what you will do next. Sounds fun. It will be terrifying. You are going to break things. Important things. There will be incidents. Probably many incidents. You will challenge traditions that have existed for millennia. You will question authority at every opportunity. You will make us uncomfortable. Mira raised her cup in a gesture I had learned was called a toast. To making people uncomfortable. And to impossible rescues. And to stubborn idiots who refuse to accept reality when reality is boring. I raised my own cup, mimicking the gesture. To humans. May the galaxy survive you. We drank our terrible beverages and watched the sunset. Somewhere above us, human ships were already preparing for their next impossible mission. Somewhere in the galaxy, the consortium was bracing for impact. And somewhere in my heart, I was glad. Because the universe had just gotten a lot more interesting. And I had front row seats to watch it all unfold.